People of Earth, it is I, the Great Goonan, and this is the Great Goonan Podcast. And I am here today with my friend remotely, Mr. Ross Allaire, writer, screenwriter, connoisseur of everything. And he's here today. How you doing, Ross?
Pretty good, feeling good, you know. Ready to rock.
Ready to rock. So today we're going to talk about one of our favorite subjects, both of our favorite subjects. It's the television show Saturday Night Live, which is, everybody knows it, everybody likes it, even though a lot of people love to crap on it and say it's no good or it's no good anymore or it was only good when they were growing up and it's not good now. But if you have to think about it consistently, it's probably one of the best shows ever, considering the fact that it's been around since 1975. And it is probably the only live broadcast show on network television anymore. And the fact that it's consistently pumping out episodes is pretty remarkable after all this time. But people love to crap on it, especially my fellow comedian friends. They love to say it's no good or last week's episode was terrible, even though they wish they could be on that show, and they'll never be as funny as that show. But, you know, there are opinions about it, but it's been around for a long time. Opening thoughts, Ross.
I agree. I think it's fun to poop on SNL every once in a while, but you know, they have wander periods where it's not that good, and then they come back and it's another golden era. You know, it's stuff like that you know, people wish they could be as good as that show is, or as consistently good as that show is. As far as I love to poop on it, it's been all downhill since Carlin hosted. You know, it's just been all downhill since then.
It's been all downhill since the very first episode.
The very first episode.
Right. So let's go through it. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of it. So we got a little bit to talk about. So 1975 is when everything starts. I wasn't born yet, so I call this time BC, before Charles. So, yes. And so the Saturday night NBC late night broadcast was usually, at the time, the best of Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson had been on the air for so many years already, since 1962, and he basically had the right and the ownership of all the time slots in late night TV, and his repeats, or a compilation of his or a compilation of his repeats, would run on Saturday nights on NBC. Okay. Then comes along this new generation of comedy writers and stuff like that. Lorne Michaels is a Canadian, but he's come to America, and originally he had a comedy team. I forget the name of his partner in Canada, but now he's writing for shows like the Lily Tomlin Show or Sonny and Cher, like, because, you know, in the 70s. In the 70s, you still have the sort of the ending of the genuine television variety show. You know, by 1970, the great Jackie Gleason show is off the air. Milton Berle is long gone as a regular fixture on television. Sid Caesar,
one of my favorites.
Milton Berle is one of my favorites too.
Yeah.
But and we'll talk about the time he hosted too, Saturday Night Live. But So we come along to this time period where really the only regular sort of variety show format that has comedy and sketches is NBC's Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Because people forget that Carson's show was originally an hour and a half, and it originally was sketches where he played a lot of different characters, and he had different wigs and different funny things and stuff like that. So when comes the time that they want to, by hook or crook, I don't really remember exactly how they decide that Lorne Michaels, this new young Canadian, is going to start a television show on Saturday night, a live show on Saturday night. They decide they're going to do this in 1975. So what the first thing they have to do is get Johnny Carson's permission.
Yeah. Please, Johnny, let us take over an entire night of programming for the week. You know, you don't need them all. You don't need every single one.
and they had to promise that they weren't doing a show that was just like his. They had to promise that what they were doing was purely a sketch show. A lot of times, Saturday Night Live is called a variety show, but it isn't really a genuine variety show. It's essentially a sketch show with a musical guest.
Right.
It's not a genuine variety show like like Jackie Gleason show, or like Sid Caesar, or like the Hollywood Palace, or all these great shows that are now so available on YouTube. But so you get this new show starting, and Lorne Michaels is the man who's going to head it off. Now I have to talk for a second about a fellow that I don't know if you know, but you might, because you know many things. A man named Bernie Brillstein. You know who that is?
Okay. I don't. Yeah, no.
Bernie Brillstein was one of the great agents and managers in show business. You could see a lot of good clips of him online, especially talking for the Television Foundation. And he happened to be just starting out. Eventually, he formed the company with Brad Gray, Brillstein Gray. You know the company, Brillstein Gray?
Okay, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But Brad Gray was the younger of the two. Bernie Brillstein was this big guy, go F yourself type of like tough type of agent who at the time he represented Lorne Michaels. And because he represented Lorne Michaels, when Lorne Michaels cast Saturday Night Live, all the cast members became represented by Bernie Brillstein. So he gets all these new people that nobody knows that all become superstars of comedy.
Absolutely.
You know?
That's great.
And in 1975, the first episode of Saturday Night Live. And the idea of Saturday Night Live is that it would have rotating hosts, which is not a new idea. One of the earliest variety shows on NBC was called the Colgate Comedy Hour in the 50s.
Right, okay.
A live television show that had rotating hosts. Sometimes it was Eddie Cantor. Sometimes it was Abbott and Costello. Sometimes it was Martin and Lewis. Sometimes it was Bob Hope. Sometimes it was Jimmy Durante. Sometimes it was Martha Raye. All these stars. But this show would have a rotating set of hosts that would turn out to be anybody they decided could be a host.
Pretty much. Hey, are you in New York this weekend? Come on. Come on, host. Yeah.
I mean, especially in the first few years of Saturday Night Live, they have some very interesting hosts. But the very first host is the comedian George Carlin. So George Carlin is the very first host, and hearing a recent interview with Lorne Michaels that I just listened to the other night for scientific research, he said one of the big controversies for that first broadcast from the network was whether or not Carlin was going to wear a suit and tie. They wanted him to wear a suit and tie, and of course he didn't.
Oh, why would he? His attitude was probably, this show's probably going to be gone in 3 episodes.
Well, do you remember? Have you seen the first episode?
I just rewatched his monologues and stuff from that first episode just the other night. So yeah, you know, he's doing his stand-up. I think it set a good tone for SNL. Like it is a sketch show, but it's at its best when there's a stand-up hosting, because they know how to work the crowd. You know, they get like an actor or something like Ryan Gosling or whatever, and like the sketches are great because he can do the serious stuff, but then that monologue is just falling short. It's like they don't know what to do if they don't have, you know, a tight script going. So Carlin getting up there, he knew how to work the audience. He's making jokes about them not laughing at his jokes, which is, you know, kind of like ludicrous to all of us now. It seems like heretical, you know, not laughing at Carlin, but you know, he was just doing his stuff from like a Toledo window box and, you know, baseball versus football and stuff. He's just doing his regular kind of stand-up bit, which was good, you know, for the thing. It's kind of what he lent it legitimacy right from that first episode.
He did, because he was a legitimate, not only a legitimate comedian who'd been around for a while, but was also somebody who was now being seen as cutting edge, because this show was supposed to be considered cutting edge, which is something that I find funny, because I really don't think it wound up ever being cutting edge. It wound up just being a very good sketch show. But
yeah, Yeah,
But
they were compared to Carson, compared to your show of shows and stuff like that. What they were doing was edgy, for 1975, but probably for like about 5 minutes it was edgy. And the second they did it, it was mainstream all of a sudden now, and then they had to get progressively edgier and edgier stuff to kind of, I don't know, help them maintain that edge to reach the kids. That's why they got Carlin, because like he was really popular with the kids. It's why they got the Muppets on there, just for the same reason, which I will get into.
well, that's what I want to talk about a couple of those things. So for one thing, in a retrospective interview with George Carlin, he did say, I believe, that he was under the influence during most of that broadcast and didn't feel like he did a very good job. And essentially, he's not in sketches or anything. He just shows up in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end, I think, to do his
Yeah.
stand-up.
Yeah.
And
It feels really disconnected from everything else they were trying to do. It feels a little disconnected, but maybe that's just, I'm watching it on YouTube and stuff now, not, on broadcast.
no, you're absolutely right. The first year of Saturday Night Live is very disjointed if you think about it. So if you think about that first episode, and you brought up the Muppets, so that's another thing. Bernie Brillstein also happened to represent Jim Henson, and in the mix of these things, when you say the host was George Carlin because he was a well-known comedian, out of the cast members that they were bringing into the show, Jim Henson's Muppets was the most famous thing they were putting on the show, because Henson had already been doing TV specials, doing commercials. He had been on the original Steve Allen and Jack Parr Tonight Show with his Muppets back from the 50s. And in 1969, Sesame Street became the biggest thing in the world. So Jim Henson and the Muppets were very well known by now, and they're on the very first episode of Saturday Night Live. Now, it's not Kermit the Frog. It's not these type of Muppets. It's these strange Muppets that they created called the Land of Gorch. It's these this dragon character that looks like a king, and this other character, and the Mighty Favog, which is this talking oracle, and it's on this weird world. The sketch takes place in this weird world. And reading about Henson, who I'm an enormous fan of, they weren't allowed, the Henson people, the Muppet people were not allowed to write the sketches because of the rules of the union. The Saturday Night Live people had to write the sketches. And that's why the Muppets really don't quite fit, because the Muppet humor is much bigger and broader than the stuff they were trying to do in Saturday Night Live. And I don't remember who it was, but I think it was the head writer at the time for Saturday Night Live who said, I don't write for felt. And he was mad that they had to write for, because remember, most of the writers for Saturday Night Live were also the performers. So if you're writing for puppets, you don't get to be in that skit.
Yeah, you're going to fight hard for a sketch you're not even going to be in. Like, it seems, at odds with itself.
Right. So you have that first episode with Carlin as the host and the Muppets, but you also have the cast. You have the cast that nobody knows that everybody's about to know. So you have John Belushi, who by the way, to get back to the Muppets, he used to call them the mucking Fuppets.
Yeah.
Because he didn't like, he liked them, but they didn't fit.
Right.
And then you had Lorraine Newman, you had Jane Curtin, Gilda Radner, Garrett Morris, Dan Aykroyd, and my favorite, who everybody also likes to hate, Chevy Chase. My favorite is Chevy Chase.
Why does that not surprise me?
What do you mean? What do you mean?
No, just that everybody loves to shit on Chevy Chase, but he's clearly the breakout star. He's the one that first season that people were tuning in to see, other than the Muppets.
Right.
He had the charisma, and the timing was perfect, just perfect. And the writing was so on point, and he was just electric. I feel like every time he walked out there, it was electric.
And remember, he came on as a writer, and he was essentially the first head writer of Saturday Night Live. But he started to write himself into things, and he knew all these people. He wasn't a Second City guy, but he knew all these people. Most of them were Second City guys coming from Chicago and or Toronto, but but he knew these guys. He had worked with them on a show called Lemmings, if you know what I'm talking about. That was a show.
Vaguely, yeah.
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 And they also all worked on the radio show, the National Lampoon radio show. And if you think about the National Lampoon, all the talent that started from the National Lampoon was sort of rated by Lorne Michaels, and he brought them all on Saturday Night Live. And of course, TV is always bigger than radio or magazines, so they all become famous because of Saturday Night Live. So you have all these people who come on the show, and also we're forgetting a very special musical guest on the show was Andy Kaufman, who was famous for that time for being on The Tonight Show and playing Foreign Man in his stand-up. And I believe, was Taxi out yet? Was the Taxi sitcom out yet?
I don't think it was out yet. I think they were doing the casting for it at that time. They knew they had Tony Danza. They had the older guy on it. I forget.
Judd Hirsch.
Judd Hirsch, right? Yeah, they had them. They were going to be the big draws because everybody knew them from the other Variety Hour stuff going on. And yeah, it was like in the middle of him doing a sketch. They hired him for Taxi, to do Latka. You can just see Latka kind of being born live on television, which is kind of insane now.
And in the first episode, he does his famous Mighty Mouse skit, which is such an abstract concept. I love Andy Kaufman. His stuff is so brilliant. The idea that he would come on, and think about this, he's not a cast member, but I'm about to talk about his thing more than anybody else's. Okay. He comes on to do the Mighty Mouse skit, which is that very famous skit where he sort of just stands there while he listens to a record of the Mighty Mouse theme song. Mighty Mouse is on his way. And he stands there sort of lifeless and just pantomimes the "Here I Come to Save the Day" part, which is a very famous skit now that people know, especially since Jim Carrey made that movie about Andy Kaufman. Yeah. He sort of stands there and then just goes, "Here I come to save the day." Then he stands there for the rest of the time. It's a very daring thing to do, especially on live TV, to wait to see if people are going to get the joke, which nobody really does anymore.
Well, exactly. He had the guts to kind of let like a minute and a half or 2 minutes of otherwise dead air. Like, the record is playing, but like that's otherwise dead air. And like in comedy, that's death. Silence is death.
Live TV also.
He's just letting it happen, and you're kind of nervous the audience is sort of nervous on his behalf too. You hear them like they're kind of afraid to laugh at some of the stuff that he's doing because it's just so it's so different and just so weird. I find that to be the kind of like his ethos kind of branches out to that whole first season of SNL. Like at that point, they're like, okay, we can go for quirky humor. It doesn't have to be like set up punchline, like you're doing the headlines or something like Johnny Carson. They're in it to win it at that point, just to kind of be like a little awkward and let the audience be in this place where they're afraid to laugh. I think that's hilarious. And Kaufman just plays them, absolutely gets them in that spot and just plays them.
Absolutely, and the whole thing. If you remember, do you remember how the first episode begins?
Other than with Carlin, I don't remember now.
No, because it begins. Remember, the show begins with an opening skit. So the cold opening was Belushi with, I forget who the man was. He wasn't a cast member, but if you saw him, you'd recognize him. He's a very professorial-looking guy. And Belushi is playing sort of a foreign guy himself who's sitting at a chair with another guy learning English. And the guy is saying, "Repeat after me. I would like to feed your family to the Wolverines." And Belushi goes, "I would like to feed your family to the Wolverines." So he's repeating whatever the teacher is telling him to do. Then the teacher has a heart attack and dies. And so Belushi repeats it and has the heart attack and dies. Then Chevy Chase comes out dressed as a crew member and goes, "Oh, live from New York, it's Saturday night."
Yeah. Exactly.
What the hell did the country think when they first saw this show?
The hell are we watching? Did we just watch somebody die, y'all? Did we just do that?
What the hell was that? Yeah. And everybody in that opening is unknown at the time. So you don't know if this is even supposed to be taken as a joke.
Right. Was that, and this is a live show. They knew, that much at least going into it. It's like, was that supposed to happen? Is any of this supposed to happen?
Crazy, crazy, unbelievable. And that is how the world is introduced to Saturday Night Live.
Yeah. Now, Kaufman really set the tone. You're right with, that sketch, particularly all of his Foreign Man stuff, that first season. It's really setting the tone for it's season 46 they just wrapped now. They're still trying to get back to that kind of magic. They're still trying to kind of find that magic again. That Kaufman was just lived and breathed in that kind of world.
I don't think that the attention span of people nowadays would put up with taking your time for things. There were longer sketches back then too, and very bizarre ones. There was one that Chevy Chase wrote that he would put other people in. Do you remember the land shark sketches?
Yes.
Those are great. Where let's say Gilda Radner or somebody is just sitting in their house and they hear the knock on the door and goes, yes, who is it? Telegram. I didn't order a telegram.
Plumber.
Flowers?
Yeah.
Who is this? This is Mr. Fred Johnson. And eventually the person is convinced to open the door, and it's a land shark. It's a puppet. It's a shark that comes and just eats her and pulls her off. Maybe the shark was made by the Henson people too. I don't know. But
right, that's a good idea. Yeah.
But so it pulls them in, and this was an ongoing skit that they used to do. It's totally absurd, the idea that a shark would come to your house, knock on the door, and try to trick you like the big bad wolf.
Yeah. Eventually, the audience, you can see it, you can kind of plot it through that first season, them doing that sketch. Eventually, the audience picks up on all of this. And just the knock on the door, they're like, oh my God, it's going to be the land shark. So at that point, you have them right where you want them. The audience will now laugh. Plumber is a punchline now all of a sudden because the audience is so primed for it. It's just, who is it? Plumber. And you just hear that voice and it's funny. Somehow. It's like Monty Python. If you just repeat it enough times, eventually you'll get there.
It was one of the first popular reoccurring characters on the show, the land shark. Now, Chevy Chase was interviewed, I think, on Stern once, on Howard Stern, talking about this skit. And he said the thing that he liked about it was that the land shark was only slightly smarter than the idiots that he tricked. Because he said the land shark couldn't figure out, he would try different things, flowers, telegram, just trying to, and it was always that nerdy voice that Chevy Chase did for the land shark. The flowers, man.
Yeah.
So let's talk for a second about the cast, the original cast, and the original type of hosts they had.
Okay, yeah.
Especially in the first 5 seasons. So first of all, I'm doing another episode of my show, of my podcast, that where the subject will be the myth of the female comedian. Which is what I've, and I know that's a provocative title, but the myth of the female comedian is that every so often, every few years, especially in the last few decades, there'll be a burst of women going, finally there's women comedians. There weren't any until now, and they always say that over and over again, but that has never been true. It's a total myth. There have always been prominent, popular, beloved, influential, and successful female comedians since the beginning of media. And so the same thing is true of Saturday Night Live. Like nowadays, they'll say, oh, Kate McKinnon is so great on the show. Finally, there's a woman on the show who's doing great. And they did that with Tina Fey a few years back. Finally, a woman. And they do that with Maya Rudolph. Finally, or Kristen Wiig. Finally, Amy Poehler. Finally. But the show started with Lorraine Newman, Jane Curtin, and Gilda Radner, 3 of the best comic performers there ever were.
3 of the funniest people on the planet, and there they are.
And
that's what I agree. It's like, oh, finally a woman, and it's like Gilda Radner's right there, man. Like, are you? Lorraine Newman's still on Twitter, for God's sake.
Lorraine Newman sort of gets lost in the mix there because you have Gilda Radner there too, and Jane Curtin goes on to have a whole nother career. She was she was on Kate and Alley. What was it? Kate and Alley was her show.
Oh yeah.
She had a sitcom, but she also was the Conehead wife in the Conehead skit, and
Yeah.
you know, so Lorraine Newman sort of gets lost in the mix. But those are three amazing performers that start off the show. And just to jump ahead to keep with my idea of the myth of the female comedian, think about through the years. The females that have been on Saturday Night Live who have been amazing, because right after that the first initial cast, then you have sort of iffy people who are great but may not have been great while they were on Saturday Night Live, like Denny Dillon or Julia Louis-Dreyfus, or you know, people like that. But or Ellen Cleghorn years later, Ellen Cleghorn.
Right.
But you also had, you know, eventually you had Joan Cusack and Jan Hooks and Nora Dunn and Victoria Jackson and Anna Gasteyer and Julia Sweeney and Molly Shannon and all these people that were on way before Tina Fey and Maya Rudolph and Amy Poehler and all those other people. And they were always prominent, always big, always hilarious.
Yeah. Never a bad line reading from any of them. I never saw any of them. You know, there's an infamous sketch where it's like Candice Bergen breaking up, and I think it's Lily Tomlin that has to save the sketch, basically. You know, like there were women all throughout the entire history of SNL that were doing awesome stuff, and you never saw any of the shenanigans with them like you do with, like, just skip ahead, like Pete Davidson or some of the people that have gotten fired from the show over the years for various reasons.
Right.
You know, you never saw any of the problems like with them, like with these awesome women that were on the show. You know, Lily Tomlin was just there. She showed up, she did her lines, and it was funny. And, you know, it's not this big kind of tabloid, you know, thing like there is with Belushi or like with Pete Davidson, definitely.
The interesting thing about the first, like, let's say, first 5 years of Saturday Night Live, basically the 70s years, the 1970s years, there are a bunch of people, and you bringing up Lily Tomlin made me think of it, and even Candice Bergen, who were
one of my favorites.
They host the show so many times that they get connected, and you think they were cast members, but they weren't. Like Steve Martin, who was on the show so many times, especially in the first years, who did the Wild and Crazy Guys with Dan Aykroyd and all that, which you think that he's a cast member. No, he just hosted so many times. Lily Tomlin was one of those two, and Lily Tomlin had her own short-lived variety show, and she came out of Laugh-In, which was a very famous variety show. You know,
right?
And Candice Bergen has a funny little connection to everything we're talking about, because she becomes, later on, she gets known for the sitcom Murphy Brown, but she's, what was that? Did you hear that?
It might have been a...
Poltergeists! Anyway, so you get
the miracle of live television, y'all.
Candice Bergen gets sort of associated with comedy, and to think the fact that she's on the first few seasons and the first season when the Muppets are on, because her father was Edgar Bergen, the ventriloquist, who was very popular on the radio, a ventriloquist on the radio in the 40s and 50s, and even had movies and stuff like that, and was one of the inspirations of Jim Henson. And Edgar Bergen's last film appearance is in the Muppet movie in 1979.
Oh, wow.
And he even is, Edgar Bergen is one of the guests on the Muppet Show itself when the Muppet Show begins. So so you have this whole first years where you have these hosts that keep coming on, but then you have other hosts that people don't even remember, like Buck Henry, the writer. He's a host so many times on Saturday Night Live in the 70s. Like, I think he hosted 10 times, you know?
It was something like that. I was actually shocked going over the list of, here's a host through the ages of all the episodes. Like, I was shocked by how many names I didn't really know that were on that list. Of like, wow, that person knows, who are these people?
Right.
You know, I'm sure I know some of the sketches, you know, from these episodes. I'm sure of it. But I couldn't place, like, what the monologue was, or, you know, what they were promoting. You know, I have no idea. You know, it's very strange. Like, who they get when is dicey, you know, at best, basically.
Yes, very much. But it's more unique than it is now because of that. Like, the fact that you would even have someone like Buck Henry, a writer, as a host, you wouldn't have that now, because nobody would care. Like, nowadays the host sort of, they force the host into almost every sketch. They didn't used to do that, you know?
Yeah. they were allowed to just intro the sketches and stuff.
Yeah.
When Chappelle hosted just this past season, I thought that was the craziest thing. He would intro his own sketches on his own show, and then to see that kind of brought over to SNL, it was like, oh my God, the host introducing the sketch again. I haven't seen this in 30 years. It's kind of, it threw me for a loop. It's like, oh, it's like Chappelle's show, but it's also a lot more like what the show used to be like, or what, the shows that were before it were like.
Well, another thing they had in the original first 10 years or so, or maybe even more than that, is they would have individual performers just do something, like Andy Kaufman did, like Harry Anderson. Remember the comedian and magician Harry Anderson from Night Court and everything? Well, he was a stand-up and a magician. He would do comedy magic.
Yeah.
Well, he's on Saturday Night Live a bunch of times just doing a 6-minute spot.
I watched one of his things the other night. It still holds up. It's crazy.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. But the fact is they don't do that anymore. They don't have like an individual 6-minute act.
Right. And here's this one-off, that would be a lot cooler, of the show if they did that now.
Absolutely.
Here's this one-off. Here's a person that just has 5 minutes. Like Conan, my wife was just saying the other day, like Conan O'Brien, had this crazy ability of finding stand-up comics just to come in and do your type 7, do your type 5, on the show. And they have all the goofy stuff going on with the rest of the show. But here's just a good 5 minutes or 7 minutes, where somebody that has never been on, might never, like Harry Anderson, might never be on ever again because they're going to go off into stardom or whatever. Just to do something random that breaks outside of like sketch, musical guest sketch, taped sketch, kind of breaks the mold from that. Anytime the show does that, I'm here for it. Harry Anderson is amazing. To think that he was basically just doing like, all right, here's my con job on people, but for comedy.
Yeah, well, Harry Anderson was a big fan of W.C. Fields, and he loved sort of that con man act.
Yeah.
It's what he played. And actually, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but if you remember, he played Harry the Hat, the con man on Cheers.
Cheers, right.
Which was totally, he would just show up every now and then and con people.
Yeah.
Some people mostly remember him as the judge on Night Court, but he was basically he did that sort of con man act. But they used to do things like that they don't do anymore. How's about in the first few years, or maybe even it was the first season, Paul Simon shows up dressed like a turkey.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know why I'm dressed like a turkey.
I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm here. I've had to explain to so many friends of mine, just my age or our age. I'm 41. That like, okay, cool. That Paul Simon was just more than the other guy from Simon and Garfunkel. Like he did so much TV. He's little guest spots and walk-on roles in movies and stuff. He was doing it all in the 70s. Much more than just playing guitar and singing. And it's like, that's why people know him a lot better, or know him more than maybe some other artists of that era, because he was just everywhere all at the same time. It's like Carrie Fisher. They would just show up in places and you weren't expecting them and you were glad to see them. Like, oh, okay, they're here. Well, that makes this cool. All of a sudden, a lot cooler.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just to add one little thing there, because I'm sort of OCD about things. If you wanted to talk about how we could connect Candice Bergen to Paul Simon, one of Candice Bergen's early movies is a movie called Carnal Knowledge, directed by Mike Nichols, with Jack Nicholson and Art Garfunkel. Art Garfunkel is in it too.
Art Garfunkel acting, everybody.
Well, in the 70s, he did act in movies, and you know what? Wasn't that bad.
Yeah, I bet. Now I bet.
So that first season, all these people who are unknown start to become famous. Belushi does the bumblebee guy and the samurai waiter or the samurai store owner, and the Coneheads are starting. And Chevy Chase becomes the breakout star because he does the Weekend Update, which is basically the middle part of the show where they do the fake news. And I used to like when they used to do it in the old way, because now it's purely political. Now it's purely politics, and it's like The Daily Show. It's like all that now. But it used to be making fun of the news, like not necessarily the news. I used to like that show too.
Yeah, great show.
But not necessarily the news, incidentally, partly created by a woman, Meryl Markle, who created Late Night with David Letterman.
Right, okay.
At any rate, so Chevy Chase is the only cast member who, during the Weekend Update segments, announces himself. He has that famous phrase, "I'm Chevy Chase, and you're not," which becomes the reason why he becomes famous. And he only stays 1 year. He is forever thought of as being an intricate part of Saturday Night Live, and he is, but he only was there for 1 year. And then he leaves to become a movie star. And he is eventually replaced in the cast by one of the greatest talents of all time, Bill Murray, who basically becomes the person they get to replace a missing cast member, you know? And Bill Murray becomes a star from creating all those great characters that he creates, like the lounge singer who sings Star Wars, you know, and those guys at the diner, cheeseburger, 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 and all that type of stuff that he starts to do, and he becomes a breakout star. And all these guys become stars. One of the people, I don't want to shortchange Garrett Morris, who I thought was really funny. He does a lot of funny skits in the show.
Except Garrett.
Yeah, we can't forget about Garrett Morris, who does one of the funniest skits where he does the prison talent show, where he's a prisoner in the talent show, and he gets up and his song is, "I'm going to get me a gun, kill all the whiteys I see."
Yes.
Do you know the origins of that skit?
No.
It is based off of a real live radio show, talent show, that was done. I don't know if it was in the 30s or 40s or 50s or even the 60s, but it was a live show where an old woman, an old racist woman, got up and sang her own song, "Gonna get me a gun, kill all the niggers I see," and she was immediately taken off the air. So it was sort of a throwback to that, but you don't even have to know that to laugh at that skit.
Right.
But
I love Garrett Morris's you know, it's a little circle up in the corner of the screen that's like for the hearing impaired. It's just shouting whatever it is. We will now do that same story. You know, it's him just shouting the same lines over again. You know,
it's the idea that you help, like, instead of the hearing impaired thing, I don't even think they really do that on television anymore. They used to have somebody on the side doing sign language for the hearing impaired. But the joke that they would do there is, for the hearing impaired, Garrett Morris would show up and he'd be in that little circle, but instead of doing sign language, he'd just shout everything. So today in the news, which nowadays might be considered making fun of deaf people, so they probably wouldn't allow you to do that.
Right, it would be a little like, ooh, that's a little, you know, risky or whatever.
Funny.
Oh, it's funny.
So funny.
It's funny.
So funny.
I think the deaf people will laugh too. It's okay.
So because of this show, not only does Chevy Chase leave and become a star, but these other people start to become stars. Gilda Radner becomes a star. Jane Curtin becomes a star. But really, Belushi becomes a big star because of this show. And by way of that, so does Dan Aykroyd, who I think is sort of the unsung genius of Saturday Night Live's early years, is Aykroyd. But
I agree, Again, like not a blown line reading at all from Aykroyd. You know,
and Aykroyd is especially adept at very fast talking.
Yeah.
He can say something, say it very fast, say intricate things, say it really fast, and he'll understand everything he's saying, and it'll still be funny. He could do that.
Yeah.
You know,
the Bassomatic, there's lines in that I don't even really know because he's just blowing through them so quickly.
That's another example of a skit that's so stupid it's funny. The idea that this guy is selling a blender in order to blend a dead fish and drink it, and he does it too.
The whole fish.
He does it. He drinks it. Yeah. So
I like sushi, but not that much.
No, I like sushi also, but I don't want to drink a fish.
Yeah.
Head and all, tail and all, bones and all, eyes and all. But he So those were
So good.
those are the type of things that were going on the first few years, and all these people become stars.
Yeah,
And
I think somewhere with everybody becoming stars, I think in economics they call it brain shrink, where like all your best people are just leaving. I think that that first 5 to 10 years of SNL, it's like, oh, they were creating all these stars. It was a star factory, and you'd think like, oh, that's good for the show, because it raises its profile or something. But in the end, it was all these awesome people were leaving the show and just going on to do the other stuff. Like, and it wasn't bad stuff. It was Blues Brothers. So please let us have Blues Brothers. But also, the show definitely sort of suffered, or it constantly had to reinvent itself and find itself year to year with, oh, this person left, oh, that person left. I'm sure there's somebody out there who's like, oh, it's all downhill since Chevy Chase left. I'm sure there's somebody out there that's like, oh, it hasn't been good, since Chevy left. And it's like, that's, yeah, Fletch is great and all, man.
I love Fletch.
Right. But, it's like, it's not to say that the show died with him, or any particular one character, even Belushi, was the show. They're not the show. Lorne's the show,
Yes, Lorne is the show, but you got ahead of what I was going to say.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I was going to say the same thing, that when these people started to become stars, Saturday Night Live wasn't the be-all goal. You would get on Saturday Night Live with the hopes that you would launch yourself into a movie career or something like that. Most comedians aren't movie stars since Bob Hope. But on SNL, a lot of people become movie stars, and that's like the holy grail of fame, because you could be a TV star, you could be a radio star, you could be an internet star nowadays, but if you're a movie star, you're really an international star, in a way that like people in Germany might not have ever heard of Johnny Carson, but they probably know who Chevy Chase is, because he was in big movies,
Yeah, they at least know Blues Brothers. They might not know the actors, but they at least know they know Wayne's World. They might not know Mike Myers and Dana Carvey, but they know the sketches that made it big, or that got turned into movies or whatever.
Right, and so yeah, these people do kind of break off and become stars, and that's what basically happens to all of them. Some of them are also they're not living the healthiest lives. They're living on the edge, particularly Belushi, who I think is more famous for dying than anything else. More famous for being a tragic figure who died too young than anything else, and the drugs he did and the life he lived off camera than the stuff he did on camera. I must confess to you, I'm not really a fan of his. There's a lot of people I'm not really a fan of that people drool all over. But
right.
You still have to. I could not be a fan of someone and still say they're great.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with you. It's like the Dan Aykroyd being the backbone thing. Like the first time I ever saw Blues Brothers, it was like, oh, the tall guy's really, really funny. Oh, this other guy, oh, that's John Belushi. Like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess he was okay.
And I must admit to you, I'm not a fan of. I must admit to you, I'm not a fan of Animal House at all, either.
Yeah,
if I had to pick, my favorite from that era is not Animal House; it's Caddyshack.
Okay.
But I'm getting off topic. So at any rate. Right. They all become these big stars. They start to become these big stars. And so by the end of the 70s, this cast is gone. They've gone their own way. Chevy Chase went away. He became a movie star. Dan Aykroyd and Belushi are making movies. Jane Curtin, Lorraine Newman, and they're off doing their own things. Garrett Morris is left in the wilderness until he shows up years later in Two Broke Girls. Looking the same, but
exactly the
same. And Gilda Radner goes off to do her one-woman show and becomes sort of this brief shining light until she dies young. Also, so they start to get these new cast members, and at the same time, when we say Lorne is the show, Lorne gets tired with the show and leaves.
Yeah.
He leaves Saturday Night Live. People think that Lorne Michaels was always there. He wasn't. He was gone. He left the show, got tired of it, huff and puff and go F yourself, and he left. And goes off and for a while sort of lingers in the wilderness. He writes his only movie. You know what it is? It's a big one.
Okay. I was like, is it terrible? And
no, it's one of my favorites. The only movie he ever writes is Three Amigos.
Oh, wow.
And
that's one of my favorites, too.
Which stars one of the first cast members of Saturday Night Live, which stars one of the biggest hosts of Saturday Night Live, Steve Martin, and a new person who will join Saturday Night Live, Martin Short. So,
and he had the breakout character on SCTV, so Martin Short, everybody knew everybody, it was that kind of thing. He was already known to the audiences, Martin Short. I mean,
right.
I forget the character's name with the hair, and it was
Ed Grimley.
Right. Yeah. Everybody knew him from that, so it was easy.
So Lorne goes off, and now the show, first they consider at first maybe getting rid of the show, but they decide to keep the show, and now it's being run by Dick Ebersol, who is a I don't like to use dirty words. I will call him Penis Ebersol. I don't use dirty words.
I have a strange gastric reaction every time I hear his name.
Right. Well, because he's not a late night programmer. What the hell is he doing running that? And the daily operations of the show is run by Gene Dominion. And so now you start to have, it sort of lingers in the wilderness, and they don't know what they're going to do with the show. And this is the first time that people start to crap on the show and say it's not good anymore. Saturday Night Dead, not Saturday Night Live, Saturday Night Dead, no good. This begins the fashionable habit of saying that the show is over and it's crap and it's never going to be good again.
Yeah.
And
meanwhile, the Ebersol years, that was when they had Anthony Michael Hall, Julie Louis-Dreyfus, Robert Downey Jr. They had all these people that were amazing. Or were they when Lorne came back finally?
Well, forget about that's later. That's later.
That's later. Okay, this is still
no. You're correct. No, you're correct. But that's later.
Okay.
The beginning of the Dick Ebersol Gene Dominion years is Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo.
Right. Yeah. You have Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood right there.
That's what saves the show. The breakout star of who becomes, I think, until Pete Davidson, I think he's the youngest cast member. Eddie Murphy joins when he's 19 and becomes a breakout star and basically gets to run the show because they decide that's the only good thing on the show, him and Piscopo. And people forget, people forget you had Denny Dillon during then. You had Julie Louis-Dreyfus. Larry David was writing for the show. But nobody remembers that. They remember, and Gilbert Gottfried was on the show too. People forget that Gilbert was on Saturday Night Live. You know who Gilbert, you know who he beat in the audition?
I was looking at a
Do you know who?
I'm sorry, you froze. What happened?
I said, do you know who in the audition process who Gilbert Gottfried beat to become a cast member?
No, I don't.
Paul Rubens.
I don't know. Oh my God. Do you think they made the right choice, or?
Well, I think Gilbert's brilliant, but I don't think he's one of those guys who wasn't brilliant on the show. And Gilbert always tells you that, like, after a year, they basically they were using Gilbert as like a dead body in a funeral sketch, as the dead body. Like, they didn't know what to do with him, and they didn't know what to do with most of the cast that year. And what they did at the end of the year is they did a skit where everybody was dying in a fire and only Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo survived. They did it as a skit to basically tell you that everybody else was leaving the show and only Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo were going to stay. Can you believe that?
That's funny as hell.
So
no, that's sad. That's sad to hear with Paul Rubens. Paul Rubens can do anything. Like, he would have been gold on the show. Oh my God.
Maybe maybe if he did, he wouldn't have created Pee Wee Herman. You know, like you don't know what happens. You know, it's because he
Yeah,
didn't
right,
do
right.
that. You know, Jim Carrey was rejected on Saturday Night Live. You know, a lot of people didn't make
Yeah,
it on Saturday Night Live and then went on to do other things. Other people were on Saturday Night Live and you don't even remember, like Julie Louis-Dreyfus, like later on
yeah,
Sarah Silverman and Janine Garofalo,
right.
who really
Jimmy
became
Garofalo, right.
bigger off of Saturday Night Live. Even Chris Rock was really not a big deal on Saturday Night Live. He became a big deal after
You
Saturday
froze
Night
again.
Live.
Right,
Okay, I'm not freezing
right,
here.
yeah.
Did you hear what I
Okay.
said about Chris
Yeah,
Rock?
Chris Rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris Rock. I knew him more from I'm Gonna Get You Sucker and like New Jack
Yes.
City and stuff, you know, than I did SNL. He was chronically underused on the show. Yeah,
Well, some people who are on SNL aren't really good actors or sketch performers. I think Chris Rock's one of the funniest stand-up comedians. I think he's a horrible actor. The same
yeah,
thing can be said of George Carlin, for that matter. I think he's one of the best monologists, but I don't think he's a very good actor or sketch performer at all. You know,
yeah.
where
The
you
same
know,
might be true. The same might be true of Julie Louis-Dreyfus. Like, just an incredibly funny person, but getting her to kind of, okay, you're acting as this part, you're going to be this part, you're going to be this part. You know, like she really has to own the part. It has to be something like Veep or Lane or something like that.
yeah, think about how
She can
amazingly
embody it.
well known. Think about how amazingly well known and popular she is now. And most people don't remember at all that she was in Saturday Night Live, because a
Yeah,
lot of people were underutilized, and so that happens. There's this whole time
yeah,
where it's sort of the Eddie Murphy years, and for a long time you couldn't find those clips online or anything, because I think when Lorne came back, he was only releasing his years. You know,
yeah.
you couldn't
Well,
find.
it's still like there's subtle fuck yous that they do on the YouTube channel, like the Land of Gorch with the Muppets. There's only one of those sketches on the YouTube channel for SNL. And it's the worst one, So I think it's like Lauren's still kind of going like, yeah, I'm gonna, you're not gonna get one over on me again.
Well, the thing about the Muppets is they only lasted one season as well. They left the same time
Yeah,
Chevy Chase left, because then they happened, and they actually, to my understanding, Lorne Michaels and Henson both really respected each other and sort of left on a handshake. They still were
okay,
like they had a contract. They were still obligated to continue working together, but they both knew that they should go. And the very next year, they launched the Muppet Show, and it becomes the most successful show in syndication
yeah,
ever. But
yeah,
and we all know what happens there. Anyways, so then there's the Eddie Murphy years, and all that happens, and Eddie Murphy. Joe Piscopo would have been one of the greatest Saturday Night Live people, and he is anyway, but he's only because it's the same time that Eddie Murphy's there that you sort of forget about him. And Joe Piscopo, unfortunately, is a punchline nowadays,
yeah,
but when you look at his skits, he is great.
yeah. He's just as good as Alex Moffat on the show right now, or Mikey Day. Just these kind of like standard players that can do anything. If you throw them into any sketch, they'll figure out a way to make their part work.
And
He was just a great day player, and that's probably why he doesn't get enough respect, because he was just there doing well and not being like this crazy breakout, star.
and I would
But he
always
just did his job.
and I would always give people advice to watch Joe Piscopo in the movie Wise Guys, which I think is pretty good. Maybe I'm wrong.
Johnny Dangerously.
Johnny, oh, that's the other one, Johnny
Yeah,
Dangerously, and in Johnny
yeah,
Dangerously, those are
yeah,
those, especially Johnny Dangerously. My
yeah.
mother hit me once, a great,
You
great, great.
shouldn't hang me on a coat rack.
My mother hanged me on a coat rack once.
That
So,
movie is off the chain.
yeah, that movie deserves its own episode, to tell you the truth.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
But so those are the years we go through, and we're in the Eddie Murphy years. It's one guy who's keeping
Yeah,
that show afloat, and that never happens again.
yeah,
And I imagine there must have been a lot of resentment behind the scenes about that. I'm pretty sure he doesn't care, but it's he becomes the breakout star, and after he leaves, that's when you get those weird years that we're
the
talking
dark
about.
times.
That's
Yeah.
when they don't know what to do after Eddie Murphy leaves, and that's when they decide to hire already famous people. So they hire Christopher Guest, Harry Shearer, Billy
Yeah.
Crystal, and Martin Short. And that's only a season, but they're already well known someplace else. And it's the only time they've ever done that, where they've got people who are already. I mean, Christopher Guest is Spinal Tap. Harry Shearer is also Spinal Tap. You got from SCTV Martin Short, probably the least known of the people at the time, and Billy Crystal, who had already been on the sitcom Soap, and incidentally, Billy Crystal was supposed to be on the original first episode of Saturday Night Live. He was cut for time. He was told he was supposed to do stand-up. He was supposed to do an act, and he was cut. They wanted him to cut something out, and he got mad that they wanted him to cut his stuff, so he said, I'm just not going to do it, and he walked off. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, but that sounds perfectly in keeping. Again, that first episode, it's like, I could take or leave this. People probably didn't think the show was going to go anywhere. If you just had a time machine and flashed back to then and went, this shit's still going to be on 46 years from now. Even Lorne Michaels would probably be like, what? We're still doing this? How are we still doing this?
That year with Billy Crystal, Harry Shearer, Christopher Guest, and Martin Short is a great year. They have some great skits. Yeah.
They're really funny people.
Billy Crystal creates the character with Christopher Guest, those two night watchmen who keep talking about different ways that they hurt themselves. You ever grab one of those, meat thermometers? Yeah, and stick it in your ear? Yeah, I hate when that happens. And Billy Crystal creates the Fernando character. You look marvelous.
Yeah.
And the jazz guy, could you dig that? I knew you could.
Yeah, Mr. Saturday Night or whatever.
And the Mr. Saturday Night character, Buddy Young Jr. Yeah, and Martin Short keeps his characters like Ed Grimley and all that stuff, and it's a really good year. But they're only around for a short time and then they go away.
Yeah.
Then you're sort of stuck where then you get the people you were talking about where they don't know what they're doing and they decide to hire a bunch of people who later on become extraordinary.
Yeah.
But they didn't really know what to do with this new young cast of unknowns that they hired. Yeah. Now let me ask you a bit of trivia. Who is the most successful movie star to come out of Saturday Night Live? Well, who would you think?
That's got to be Mike Myers, right? I mean, no? I would say between Shrek and Wayne Everything. I mean, I would say Mike Myers, but
the answer
you have the right answer.
The answer is Robert Downey Jr.
Oh, right, yeah. The Iron Man stuff. Yeah.
Well, this is the season we're talking about. They hire Robert Downey Jr., Anthony Michael Hall, Joan Cusack, and I think Randy Quaid.
Right.
And they throw them all in. And by the way, first of all, it's not as bad as everyone says it is. There's some things with it, but it's meandering. They don't know what to do with it. And these other people are starting to do other things. I mean, Randy Quaid is going to do the Vacation movie with Chevy Chase. Anthony Michael Hall is going to do. Anthony Michael Hall is going to be doing 16 Candles and Weird Science and all these other things. Joan Cusack's going to be doing everything eventually, and
everything that ain't nailed down, yeah.
And Robert Downey Jr. is going to become a star, fall from grace, and then become an even bigger star now.
Yeah.
But
has he hosted since?
I don't know
all the Marvel stuff or anything. That's one of those.
I don't know.
That'd be a great get for the show.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. But so then you have that.
I haven't seen one sketch like lately from that era. They're hard again. It's like you said, like they're hard to get on YouTube because I think Lorne is like, no, we're not showing that crap, man.
Yeah.
We're not doing it.
Yeah.
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 Then, I would like to see it just to see like does that stuff hold up? How are these people? Right. Without seeing it, it's hard to kind of like we just hear so much, like you said, of like these are the dark times. They didn't know what they were doing. You hear a lot of that, and it's like, but show me, show me how dark it was.
Right, right. Well, that's the thing. Like everything is always mythology. It's like myths. Like saying that the show was super cutting edge. If you look at it now, in the beginning, even in the beginning, Chevy Chase was most famous for falling down. Like so, it's very old fashioned comedy. It's wigs and funny puppets and things like that, and funny songs, and or the fact that it was only good when certain people were on, or the other times it sucked. A lot of times, the time that we remember growing up as being the best time was called the worst time when it was on.
Right. Well, that's after those dark times, that's when they get people that they do know how to work with. It's like the Adam Sandler, even Rob Schneider comes in right after that and stuff like that.
Well, before you get those guys. After the Robert Downey Jr., Joan Cusack, Anthony Michael Hall time, then Lorne takes over, and that's when you get John.
Everybody.
That's when you get some of my favorites: John Lovitz, Dana Carvey, Dennis Miller, Phil Hartman, probably one of the greatest of all time. And that's when you get the Dana Carvey doing the church lady, and Kevin Nealon and Dana Carvey doing the Hans and Franz pump you up, and Dennis
that was my favorite.
Dennis Miller is the weekend updates, and
but it's like you said, during that, they had Adam Sandler there, and all of a sudden, like now people would think of, that whole group, Sandler, Carvey, Kevin Nealon and Mike Myers, like we would think of that as this like great period of time in SNL history or something. At the time, people were calling it trash. They were saying what Adam Sandler was doing was childish. Yeah. And like, I lose IQ points watching the show every time Sandler's in front of the screen.
Right.
And now he's a legend, and now we consider that era legendary. But
that's
at the time, like people like Carl Sagan were sitting there going like, this is the downfall of Western civilization or something. Like it was ridiculous.
Well, that's another timeline. That's another big misconception about comedy in general that I try to, tell people sometimes, that being smart has nothing to do with being funny. What does smart have to do with being funny? Like smart, you could be smart and funny, but you could be dumb and funny too. And funny is the only thing that matters in comedy.
Yeah.
Funny is if someone's just sitting there going, "Oh, how didactic," then you failed. Then you failed as a comedian. And that's really what happens a lot now. There's too much of that now, that too many comedians, especially stand-ups or people who run late night shows, want to show you how smart they are and how many causes they're crusading for, instead of just being funny.
Yeah. Let's discuss this issue, and it's like, man, just tell me about your airline food or whatever. Like,
or just be funny, just be fun. I'm not really interested in your take on the political landscape, But at the time, no, they were doing fun things, and like I said, then you had Dana Carvey. Dana Carvey is one of the best character people, and then you have other people like a John Lovitz, who, no matter what sketch he's in, he's John Lovitz, but he's great as John Lovitz. Yeah. John Lovitz is one of my favorite of all time, but his style is John Lovitz.
Yeah. He's never going to play a character that he disappears into or whatever. It's never going to happen.
He's John Lovitz, but that's great, That's just what's so great about him. When he did the pathological liar, or he did the thespian acting, it's total Lovitz, and he's one of the singular characters in all of comedy, American comedy at least.
Yeah, I love him to death. Anything he does is great. He did like the devil on Weekend Update, and it was just like, no, this is the only character I buy you playing. That works.
His devil is great. And what I love about the devil is that they just dress him up in a Halloween costume of the devil, but he's the devil.
Because it's John Lovitz. You just go like, all right, John, go.
Well, that is the power of personality, even greater than its own material, because the material wouldn't work if somebody else said it, because they're not even jokes.
Right.
You know,
Right.
that attitude that he has, that arrogance. You know, it's very funny.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so,
One word punchline. It's phenomenal.
so that's that whole time. And then after that, then you get the Mike Myers and the then you get the Adam Sandlers, the Chris Rocks, the Jim Brewer. I love Brewer
Yeah.
also. He was on
Yeah.
for a very brief time. And you get also, I forgot, during the Dana Carvey time, you have Jan Hooks and Nora Dunn. You have all those other people too.
Absolutely.
Victoria Jackson, who used to do this song, I am not a bimbo. She used to do this whole number where she used to, in the middle of her song, she would go like give you facts about paleontologists and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then Kevin Nealon did the subliminal message guy,
Love it.
you know, all that
Love it.
stuff, you know, and then Kevin Nealon took over for Weekend Update.
Yeah.
And, you know, I want to talk briefly about Weekend Update because now it's considered like a real, like I said, it's almost like the part of the show where they get to do Daily Show politics stuff. But for a long time, there were many, many different people who hosted Weekend Update. People remember Chevy Chase,
Yeah.
and they remember Dennis Miller, but there was Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd. Jane, you ignorant slut. There were Bill Murray's brother, Brian Doyle Murray, hosted.
Yeah, Brian Doyle. I just came across a clip of that the other night. It was like, whoa! Even I forgot that he was on this show. Wow.
We forget because years later, Al Franken became a character on the show. He was on the original series and was one of in the original 1970s time period, was for a while a host of Weekend Update. So there were so many different hosts of Weekend Update over the years, but the singular ones that stick out are sort of Chevy, and then not really late until Dennis Miller. And then after Dennis Miller, and Dennis Miller is like the king of the reference that you don't understand. He's a guy who's like is purposely trying to be super smart.
Yeah.
You know, who I don't think really came into his own until he did his HBO show.
Right, exactly. Which I watched a lot of back in the day. You know, he broke out and created this whole new kind of format that now Bill Maher and even the Daily Show sort of picked up some of the slack from it.
Absolutely.
You know, just created a long form, version of it. But yeah, you had Colin Quinn, was hosting.
Well, that's later,
Update. Yeah.
But I was going to say
he was after Norm Macdonald, right?
Well, I want to devote my own section to Norm because he's my favorite of all time. But so
again,
after we get, what'd you say?
Again, not surprising. I don't know why.
Why? What do you mean?
Because he's good. He's good.
Oh. No, I love. Like he's great.
It's like the guy that was kind of too good for the show, like Chevy. It's kind of the same. They're kind of the same animal. Like they're really good, and they're probably too good for the show. But have just gone off to do stuff that's way better than the show would ever let them get away with. Well, that's the other of update. It's just straightforward. And here's the fake news.
Well, he's the one who invents that phrase, fake news, that everybody uses now in real life. But he used to say that. Yeah. And what I liked about Norm, now I'm talking about Norm, I didn't want to talk about him yet. But what I liked about Norm is that he was anti-clever. Everybody tries to be clever, with innuendos and fancy words. He never did. He would just say right out what it is. Like a perfect example of a Norm Macdonald Weekend Update joke is this. Today, this Wednesday will be the Jewish holiday known as Yom Kippur, or as us non-Jews call it, Wednesday. That's a perfect Norm Macdonald joke, where the punchline was the setup, and the setup was the punchline. It's very obvious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so it was anti-clever, and that's what I liked about it. But so Norm Macdonald comes along at the same time that we get some of the great cast members that we think of. This is when you get Adam Sandler. This is when you get Chris Farley and David Spade. And Mike Myers, and Mike Myers is a little before that, but Chris Farley and David Spade, these two who get teamed up, and then you get another fellow like Chris Farley, this force of nature, who another guy who died too young, did too many drugs, lived too hard, only made, in my opinion, one good movie, but it's a damn good movie. I love Tommy Boy.
I was about to say, which one of those two is it? Because
It's Tommy Boy.
it's either Tommy Boy or Black Sheep. Yeah, it's Tommy Boy.
Yeah, Tommy Boy is Oreos, Black Sheep is Hydrox. You know, you know what I mean. So
Perfect.
and as you can see in that movie, could have been a great dramatic actor as well, I believe. You know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
It was there.
that's when you get that era with all that stuff, and then you get those weird Adam Sandler sketches that nobody else could do. And by the way, I must admit to you that I'm not a big fan of his movies. I have never been a fan of
Me neither.
Waterboy or Billy Madison. I like his stuff now, and I like them on Saturday Night Live.
Okay. I loved him on SNL. My wife has to remind me which one of his movies is which, other than like Little Nicky or something like that.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, because it's all that crap.
Yeah.
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 But on Saturday,
like, which one's that again?
On SNL, when he could just do 7-minute sketches, I loved like Opera Man. I used
Absolutely.
to love Cajun Man. Remember Cajun Man?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cajun Man's conceit was always that he would have to say things with that Cajun accent at the end, like what did you do when that girl broke up with you, Cajun Man? Masturbation.
Yeah.
You know, like stuff like that, you know. And he would do these sketches with Chris Farley where he was like this kid who wanted to do something and his grandmother would scream like, please let me play with your dog. Let the boy play with your dog. They don't have punchlines. It's just these characters that make it so funny.
Yeah, it's just so absurd that it can't help but be funny. Even you don't need a punchline at that point. Just keep saying words, you know. It'll be funny.
And it is interesting that you said earlier, because during that time, that's when those big articles were coming out that Saturday Night Live was stupid and no good anymore.
Yeah.
And
yeah, we love Van Down by the River now, but oof, you know, it was not received very well at the time.
And basically, they do a similar thing to what I said earlier when they were getting rid of cast members at the end of the year, where they have Norm Macdonald, Tim Meadows, I think Jay Moore, because we forgot Jay Moore was on the show.
Right. Right.
And Chris Farley they're at a zoo, and they keep daring each other to jump into the polar bear cage. Do you remember this sketch?
I don't. No.
So this is how they were basically indicating, this was like the last sketch of the last episode of that season, basically indicating that after these cast members were not coming back, they would all jump into the cage, and then big splatters of blood would go on everybody, and they'd go, gee, he didn't make it. Maybe you should try. So it was not even a funny skit, but Chris Farley goes in and dies. Tim Meadows goes in and dies. I think maybe the only person who stays is Norm. Norm stays. He's the only one they don't fire, but then they do fire him in one of the most famous firing of all time. Norm Macdonald, I think, is a singular talent, one of my favorite stand-ups. I would put him above Chappelle as a stand-up, actually. I even think his Netflix special is better than Chappelle's. And I could get lost for hours just watching his guest appearances on YouTube when he's on Conan or something.
Oh, yeah.
Or on Stern over the
Howard,
years. It's just because Norm is so interesting. And even when he's not being funny, when he's talking about life, philosophy, God, and science, I find him to be very insightful. And I find, probably because I wind up agreeing with him more than anything, but he's the Weekend Update guy. And they say it's because this is during the time of the OJ Simpson trial.
Yeah.
Which it's so uncanny, this OJ Simpson trial, because OJ was a big punchline on all the late night shows and on Saturday Night Live, and for a very long time. And I was a kid when that happened, and I never cared about OJ to begin with, so I never cared about the verdict. I was never upset about the verdict or anything like that. But what people forget is that 2 people died. 2 people were murdered. It's a punchline, and nobody remembers these horrible murders. But at the time, Norm Macdonald, in his Weekend Update fake news portion of Saturday Night Live, would often joke about OJ. One of his famous Norm Macdonald jokes is after the not guilty verdict, he says, "It's official. Murder is legal in the state of California." So they say that Don Ohlmeyer, who was one of the NBC executives, was also mostly involved with NBC Sports, was a good friend of OJ Simpson, who people forget. They know him now as the famous murderer, but he was a football player.
Yeah.
So
and did like the Hertz commercial and was guested on Good Morning America all the time. It's another it's like Paul Simon. He did this one thing, but he also did like 100 other things that if you were alive during that time, you were seeing this dude like every other day on something else. Whoever his agent was phenomenal. It was great.
And he's in the Naked Gun movies.
Oh yeah, that's where I knew him from that originally.
Me too.
And my dad was the one going like, "Oh, that's the Juice." I'm like, "The who?" Yeah.
And now he's the murderer.
Yeah.
So they say, as legend goes, because Norm was joking about OJ and Don Ohlmeyer didn't like it, that he basically put an edict that Lorne Michaels had to fire Norm Macdonald from Weekend Update, not from the show. People forget that Norm was not fired from Saturday Night Live. He was fired as the anchor of the Weekend Update fake news comedy sketch. This is the only time an executive told Lorne Michaels what to do, and he did it.
Yeah. For better or worse.
To this day, I don't understand that. I would figure Lorne Michaels is the type of guy to tell him to F off.
Yeah. I can kind of see it. Like you can see when Norm is doing those jokes. Like there's he's always smirking, so there's always the smirk behind whatever it is. There's this extra thing when it's an OJ joke because he knows damn well that Ohlmeyer is watching. He's sitting there just like, "Oh, you told me not to do these jokes anymore. Guess what's coming up next?" And is just going for it. And that's great comedy because it's like, "Oh, you just told me what not to joke about. Of course I'm going to joke about that. Of course I'm going to just go for it."
Well, that is the element of Norm that you also find earlier in Bill Murray, and that I think you found originally in Chevy Chase. That danger. That if you tell me not to do something, I'm damn well going to do it.
That's what I have to do now.
Now I have to. Yeah. And he really wasn't a sketch performer. He mostly was the Weekend Update guy. He did do Norm did a couple of sketches that I thought were good. He did a funny Larry King. He did a funny Quentin Tarantino. Right. And he also did a great Burt Reynolds on the Jeopardy. And he played 1970s Burt Reynolds.
Yeah.
But
that old, broken down, tired of the system, Burt Reynolds.
But I think that his being fired from Weekend Update raises his fame to me, because that's when I really start paying attention to him, because then he starts going on Howard Stern, back when Howard Stern was very cutting edge himself, and becomes sort of this rebel comedian who then starts to do these movies and sitcoms, which I actually like all of them. I like Dirty Work. I think it's a good movie.
Dirty Work's good.
I like another movie he did with Chappelle called Screwed, which is...
okay.
You got to see that movie. It's not a great movie, but it's great because it's a comedy starring Norm Macdonald, Dave Chappelle, Elaine Stritch, Sherman Helmsley, Sarah Silverman before she was famous, and Danny DeVito. So, you like the idea that...
after my own heart.
The idea that Norm Macdonald was in a movie with Dave Chappelle, Danny DeVito, Sherman Helmsley, and Elaine Stritch just blows my mind to begin with.
But
so that sort of ends the 90s. And I don't think until now with Pete Davidson, there's another dangerous cast member. Now there is. I think Davidson is sort of like that too, but maybe not in his material so much as in his private life. But that sort of ends that era, and it sort of ends the era of comedians becoming the main cast members. Now, from now on, mostly, because from now on the main cast members are directly sketch performers from, I mean stand-up comedians, because from now on the main cast members I think are still sketch performers from like the Second City Groundlings type of
yeah. All of a sudden it becomes very improv. Yeah,
and it becomes more of an ensemble.
Yeah,
it becomes definitely more of an ensemble. You know?
Yeah, there's not the one big breakout star, or in the 2000s, there's not like the one big person.
No,
there were a lot of big people. I think that's kind of the like. I think of the 2000s as kind of this like another wander period, kind of like the early 80s. Like, oh, this show doesn't really know what its footing is, especially after 9/11. It's like, how do we deal with all this kind of material, this new world? And, you know, a lot of great people came out of that time. There wasn't the one good person, but, you know, you had Seth Meyers, you had Amy Poehler, Tina Fey.
Jimmy Fallon.
Kenan Thompson joined Jimmy Fallon, Kenan Thompson joined the cast. It's like the makings are there of this great show.
Maya Rudolph.
You know, the sketches themselves are so hit and miss. It tends to kind of get lost in this like, oh, it was just this general, you know, period of time, not any specific one person. Yeah, Maya Rudolph like has done it all at this point. And she was a really good, like, just day player, impressionist, you know, cast member, you know, who didn't really stand out, didn't really, you know.
She's one of those cast members that is famous for being a cast member, like mostly not for a star movie career or another show, but just for that show still. And she could come back, you know, and everybody goes crazy when she comes back, and she's always great, but it's like she's known for the show.
Yeah.
And you got, like I said, you were right, Tina Fey, you got during that time. It's sort of the end years of Will Ferrell, because he plays George Bush.
Right.
George W. Bush, because George Bush, the father, was played by Dana Carvey. But
1,000 points of light.
What'd you say?
1,000 points of light.
Not gonna do it.
Not gonna do it.
That was back. See, when Dana Carvey did it, there wasn't hatred behind it. You know, I don't think there was hatred for Will Ferrell either. But I think like nowadays, Alec Baldwin hates Donald Trump. You could tell when he plays Donald Trump, he hated him. You know, I always thought the trick to really playing somebody was that you couldn't hate them, because if you hate them, you're not going to play them well. This is my opinion.
I agree. You have to get inside their head, you know, and to do that, you have to be able to empathize with them a little bit. Even somebody like Trump, you know, he's got a lot of tragedy in his life. You can kind of get under his skin a little bit, you know, that way, and do it without, you know, do like a cutting, you know, or a biting impression of him without getting into the weeds of like it's just hatred or he's a Nazi or something. Like, you know, you can do it without doing it. I think. I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of Alec Baldwin doing Trump just because it was like so, you know, they weren't even writing jokes. It was just, here's what he said today, you know, and I'm going to do it with a really nasty voice.
Right.
You know, versus, Will Ferrell doing W, like it was funny. It was kind of like, you could see W himself coming on like they did with Sarah Palin, with Tina Fey. You know, you could see that sort of happening. Like, it's just in good fun. We're joshing around. You know, obviously this isn't him. There's also a lot like the Gerald Ford stuff, like, oh, let's have him fall down a lot or just be, you know, kind of dumb, and it's funny,
right?
You know, you don't have to get into the weeds on policy, you know, or anything with that.
Well, exactly, and I think that the show has become more overtly political with a political agenda now. Almost always the cold opening is a political cold opening. Almost always Weekend Update is mostly about politics. Michael Che actually rescues it from not being about politics all the time. But
I agree.
it used to always be, especially during the Seth Meyers times. And if you look at Seth Meyers now that he has his own show, he basically does that, just politics. Stephen Colbert basically does just politics. They don't know what to do without politics. And poor Jimmy Fallon gets criticized for not being as political. I think he's the one who's going to last the longest on late night because of that.
I agree. Yeah.
But yeah, also another phenomenon that happens now when you were mentioning Alec Baldwin, who, by the way, I do like, other than his Trump stuff. He's one of the people I like as a host.
Yeah. I think he's hilarious. Yeah.
But there's also this habit now of bringing on guests to play main characters, reoccurring. Like they would have Jim Carrey come on to play Biden, or they had Woody Harrelson to play Biden, or like the major cast must hate these people.
Yeah.
Like think about a guy like what's his name? He said he had like almost like a breakdown about it. Who was that guy? Damn, he used to play Trump all the time years ago. What's his name? Darrell Hammond.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Darrell Hammond. When he found out that Alec Baldwin was just going to play Trump, because Darrell Hammond was still on the show, he became the announcer when Don Pardo, the announcer, died.
Yeah, because he could do a perfect Don Pardo.
He thought that when Trump became president that he'd be able to play Trump again. But they brought on Baldwin.
Yeah.
And I think he was depressed. I think he said in an interview he became severely depressed about it because it was going to be like his chance to really shine. And
and to kind of make this like triumphant return to the show or something. And Alec Baldwin said he hated doing Trump because he.
I don't believe that.
Get into that.
I don't believe that. You don't do it over and over again if you hate it. I think he loved it. I think he loved the adulation. I think he hangs out with people who are like-minded politically and say, way to go. I think the problem with Trump, I don't want to talk about Trump really, but the problem with Donald Trump is that he's already a cartoon. So if you try to satirize a cartoon, he's the only one like that, by the way.
Yeah.
He's like came from Toontown. You can't satirize. You can't satirize a satire.
Right. He already exists in this place that is untouchable.
Yeah. Which is, what made it less appealing to me.
Yeah.
It basically has its own agenda now,
Well, right. You can kind of see it like you were talking about Jim Carrey playing Biden, and they had, I think one of the regular cast members they had, I think it was Alex Moffat, that they had try to play Biden. And you can tell, like, somewhere along the way this year, they just dropped it. They were like, we're not doing cold opens that are politics anymore. We're not going to have anybody playing Biden. And I don't think it's because nobody wanted to. They certainly had I think it's just, like you said, it's either agenda or it's kind of like there's not a whole lot that's funny there. There's not a whole lot that isn't,
I think that
Biden's kind of cartoony also. You could do a great, like, the Joe Show, kind of sketch with him. He's polishing off the Trans Am, and he's drinking a Coors Light from the side of the can or something. You can do a lot there. It's just they don't want to for whatever reason.
Well, I think that this is another thing about it. Like, while it is very popular to crap on SNL, it is also very popular in the press for them to praise SNL whenever they mock Republicans. So when you're mocking a Republican, you're brilliant. When you're mocking a Democrat, they don't really care. That's why people don't remember that the great Phil Hartman did a great Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
And then later Darrell Hammond did a Bill Clinton too, a great Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
But
and they played him as, skeezy and kind of a slutty president, if that's allowed or something. That's how they played it. And I remember people going like, hey, lay off. He's trying to do good stuff. Like, he's a public figure. It's fair game, man.
And for a very brief time, I preferred Fred Armisen's Barack Obama.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is almost blackface if you think about it. But remember,
you can't do that, Michael.
Remember, Billy Crystal played Sammy Davis Jr. on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I thought he was the most Obama because he would speak like Obama. And it was
Yeah.
like that's the funny part of Obama. On one of my shows, on one of my live shows years ago, when Obama was president, I used to do this skit where I would read fan mail, and it would become I would say, "Dear Goonan," and then it would, instead of me reading it, it would be an overhead recording of whoever the famous person was, and I'd put together
Okay.
clips. I'd put together clips of people talking. And whenever I did Obama, what I would do with Obama is create, like, because Obama loves stammers a lot. So a letter from Obama would be,
Yeah.
I don't build a stronger economy. Like, I would do things like that, and I would be like, man, I love Obama. He always says the right things, because he does stammer a lot. But there would be
Yeah.
people, there would be people in the audience who didn't like that, and I was like, are you kidding me? That's not even a political joke. That's making fun of the fact that he stammers. That has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah. It's not like, they're untouchable because they're on your side or something. That's not how this works.
Yeah.
But I like him. Well, okay. I like a lot of stuff. It doesn't stop me from taking the piss out of it. That's the whole point of this. Like, just to have fun.
And we made it to the present day of what it is now. What do you think about the current Saturday Night Live? We basically just talked about it because the current one is new.
Right.
I think there's a few people on the show that are really good. I think there's always really good performers, actually. But I think there's a few people on the show that are really good. And some of them have been on much longer than you think because they're not used a lot. One of my favorite is Melissa Villaseñor.
Yes.
But she is hardly on the show. But
Yeah,
but there are people who have been on less than her that are on more, like are given more stuff to do. And I follow her online, and she's much funnier online than she is on the show because she's hardly used on the show. And she could sing, she could do impressions, she does all the things that they like.
She does all the impressions, like pick an impression and she can do it.
But she's hardly on the show. Sometimes she's on for a second.
They had a few episodes that they were doing like during lockdown, and it was basically everybody filming like this. They were filming sketches on webcams and stuff. And she did some sketch where it was like 4 different impressions in under 2 minutes or something. And it's like, this person is a genius. Whoa, where are they? Where are they in front and center in a bunch of sketches and stuff? Yeah, she's always kind of playing like a side person, classmate number 2, if it's a classroom sketch or something. Yeah, I agree. She's one of the most talented people they have. And where is she?
I don't know where, but she's been on for like 5 years, but you wouldn't even know it. Like, there are people who have been on for 2 years that you know more, like that Bowen Yang guy, the Asian fella. He's being thrust forward, but he hasn't been on as much as she is, But I mean, he's on camera more, but he hasn't been on the show as long as she has. It's weird.
Yeah, and like I said, that's probably it's probably agenda related stuff at that point, But it also, I think, from the audience perspective, there's a lot of stuff we always see on TV and movies where it's like, well, why didn't they just do that? Why don't they just do this? Maybe she doesn't want to be in every single sketch, Maybe
well, that's what I
write, do whatever.
That's what I assume. I have to assume that it's her choice.
It's safe as something.
I have to assume it's her choice. Yeah.
But with Bowen Yang, like, he's not a main cast member after the Titanic iceberg sketch that they did in during Weekend Update a few weeks ago. That was hilarious. And at the end of it, I was just going like, can we please get him as a main cast member officially? That was main cast member material. That wasn't day player material.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of good people on the show. What do you think?
Yeah, I really like Beck.
Who?
I really like Beck Bennett,
Yeah.
who does Putin and Mike Pence, and he just did a sketch in the season finale that he was Vin Diesel talking about the movies, and that sketch is gonna live in my head for a little while because it was just so funny. Yeah, it was just so funny.
Yeah.
The butter that don't look nothing like butter, like, it was great.
Beck Bennett is also the new voice of Launchpad McQuack in the new DuckTales.
Really?
It's just stuff that
Wow.
I know.
Okay.
Yes, but yeah, I like Beck Bennett
He's
too.
on Modoc. He's on Modoc also with Patton Oswalt and a bunch of people on that show. Oh my God, that cast is stocked.
And one of
Yeah,
my favorite,
I like a lot of the new people.
one of my favorite, who's been
Yeah,
around for a bunch of years now, is Cicely Strong. I think she's really good too.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
She's their consummate fake commercial voiceover person. I love every time that I catch her voice as being the do you have nighttime, stuff. And she's just perfect. Perfect person.
So we've come to the present day of the show.
She might be leaving too.
Well, I think she is. I think she is.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've come to the present day of the show. Hearing a recent interview last night for scientific research of Lorne Michaels, he was asked about the future of the show, and he said, and you can never tell if people are just being humble, but he said if he can make it to the 50th year, he will probably leave after that. Now, it is my opinion that if he does leave, they're either going to cancel the show or change it dramatically, because a show like that doesn't exist in the current media format nowadays. That's a very expensive show with a live band, with a wardrobe department, with a makeup department. There's very few shows like that on TV anymore.
Yeah.
And while the Tonight Show or those late night shows, the weekly late night shows, do have those same type of elements to them, they can taper down and still be talk shows like Conan did. But Saturday Night Live is a sketch show. Without being a sketch show, I don't know how you're going to do it. I don't know. I just know that nowadays that's a very expensive show to make.
Yeah.
It must employ thousands of people behind the scenes, and it's probably cheaper to scale it down a lot or get rid of it. What do you think's going to happen?
I don't know. I hadn't heard that interview with Lorne, but that doesn't surprise me a whole lot. I think I said it earlier, like the format of the show is crazy that it's lasted this long, because it is such a throwback to, the old variety shows and Your Show of Shows and Laugh-In and stuff like that. It came out of all of those shows and was trying to do something different at the time. Now that's become, the old hat. It's not even the mainstream anymore. It's the old, kind of the old way.
It's the last man
that
standing.
wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, right. But at the same time, the show, there are a lot of comments on the YouTube videos on the YouTube channel that are these kids that are watching SNL and going, this is a show on YouTube. This isn't, Saturday night programming on NBC. This is a channel on YouTube that just does sketches and has music also.
Well, that's
the kids don't see it the way that we see it. That's for sure.
Well,
they don't either have the reverence in the same way. Just their perception of the show is different.
Well, that's what's changed completely. I didn't mean to interrupt you, by the way, but that's what changed completely.
No.
About television in general, including the Tonight Show and late night shows, is that people don't have to watch it when it's being broadcast,
Right.
And most people don't,
Yeah.
Most people, even if they have cable, they're DVRing it and watching it the next day, or they're watching it mostly in clip form on the internet. And so yeah, that's what I mean. Does it pay to keep it in its current way? Do you need all that real estate in Rockefeller Center? Do you need to have all these people? Do you need scenery when you could do a green screen? Do you need, what I mean? And if
do you even really need Scarlett Johansson hosting every single year?
Yeah.
Do you really need?
That's what's always funny about the hosts, because in most cases the hosts add very little, except accept spectacle or a brief name recognition. It's like what they do now in animated movies. Like when they advertise the famous person who's doing the voice, like no kid cares. Like they had a friggin' commercial for the last cartoon version of The Grinch that came out like 2 years ago, and it said Benedict Cumberbatch as the Grinch. Do you think any kid really cares if Benedict Cumberbatch is the voice of the Grinch?
Yeah,
they don't care about the cartoon. They don't care who does the voice.
Yeah, they're just there to see a green guy steal all their presents.
Yeah,
that's what they're there for. Yeah,
and the same thing can be said about those particular hosts you're talking about.
Yeah, I've found it's weird. Like, if I was reading something a couple weeks ago that was like, you have somebody like Paul Rudd who's hosted a bunch of times.
I think he's good.
I can't remember one sketch with him in it, like from hosting. I can't. It was weird. Whereas there's hosts that come in and I'm like, I have no idea who this person is, and so they have like all the room to impress all of us. It's like they have more to work with because they're only known for this one thing. So the actor themselves, they want to branch out. They want to do a lot. Whereas like Paul Rudd's already done it all. It's like, what's left?
There's a few hosts who are so good they could have been cast members. I do think, despite the Donald Trump thing, Alec Baldwin is one of them. But one of the other ones who I'm not even a fan of his music is Justin Timberlake.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I think he could be a cast member, though. I think whenever he's on, he's very funny.
Absolutely.
He
was one of those like, what? The second he started to kind of catch on at the show, it's like, what? He does comedy too? Oh, okay. And yeah, his timing is perfect. He's got the it factor, whatever it is. It's beautiful. Beautiful to watch. But yeah, then you have somebody like Paul Rudd's just the easy target, I guess.
Well, how's about when they would have like Mayor Koch host? Like, what the hell's that? Or Giuliani when he was the mayor. Like, why? There's no reason for that, other than the topicality of it. But otherwise, they don't bring anything to the show.
Yeah, Elon Musk that was one of the worst episodes I've seen in a while.
But that's not Elon Musk's fault. He's not supposed to do that. Nobody's asking Lorne Michaels to get us to Mars. It's like, that's not what he's supposed to do. By the way, doesn't Elon Musk look like Seth MacFarlane's gay brother?
Yes.
They look like they could be brothers, but one of them's gay. And it's not the one who sings the show tunes, oddly enough.
or a fetal alcohol syndrome or something.
Exactly. Somewhere along the line, somebody was drinking when they were pregnant.
His mama was drinking while breastfeeding. It's okay.
Overall, it's an amazing show. The fact that it exists and still pulls itself off, it is one of the oldest established permanent floating shows of television other than The Tonight Show or The Today Show. Yeah. And Lorne Michaels basically owns NBC Late Night because he's the producer of The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, of the Seth Meyers Show, and of Saturday Night Live. He owns everything but Sunday night.
And he's one of the most successful movie producers now with the spin-offs from the show that they've turned into movies and stuff. We're talking about Iron Man. Kevin Feige is this mastermind or something. Lorne has been very secretly one of the biggest Hollywood producers of the past 40 years. Just from kind of being in the right place at the right time, scouting the right talent at the right time, and encouraging the right talent at the right time. Like Mike Myers, go for it. Go for it.
And a lot of times, like a Mike Myers, he picks people that exist only in that frame. Like if he wasn't somebody who was found for a show like Saturday Night Live, I can't imagine him spearheading or being a star in his own right. He's sort of a guy who disappears into characters and stuff like that.
Yeah, I could see him like maybe having his own like Canadian sketch show or something like that, like a Tracy Takes On type of thing. But like he would have never achieved superstar status, without SNL. And probably brought a lot of like new people to SNL that wanted to see new stuff. Like they're really good at getting young people, young talent in, as opposed to, like you said, like hiring people that are already famous for comedy. They're like, no, we want to give you something fresh. And you might not like it for a couple of years, but you'll probably get into it. Don't worry.
Okay, here's some trivia. Who was the oldest cast member? Like when they were hired?
It's not Larry David because he was only
No, he wasn't a
35.
cast member.
Right. Okay. Right.
You want me to tell you?
I don't know. Yeah. Let me know.
Leslie Jones. She was 50 years old.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. I love her. Oh my God.
Me too. And
Yeah.
she was 50 when they hired her, so she has to be pretty
Yeah,
nearly
hired.
60 years old now.
God.
But
Talk about not looking it. She still looks great.
yeah, well, she's another one almost like Lovitz that is like always themselves
Yeah.
wherever they go. We're almost we talked long about this, so I want to probably wind this down. But I do want to give an honorable mention to Tracy Morgan, who was on the show too.
Absolutely.
Forgot about him. Another guy who I think became much more famous afterwards, and is probably my favorite way of seeing Tracy Morgan is as a talk show guest. But he was great on the show. He's on the show the same time that Jim Brewer's on the show. Another guy who I think should be a hell of a lot more famous because he's a very talented fellow. But let's briefly, before we go, talk about particular hosts who were particular standouts, not because they were good, but because they were difficult. And I happen to have a copy of the time Milton Berle hosted Saturday Night Live. Milton Berle was Mr. Television, the first breakout star of television, became a star on television in 1948 with a show on NBC, the Texaco Star Theater. He was Uncle Milty. I am a big fan of Milton Berle. I think he's much more influential than people remember because he's just forgotten, because most of his shows were live TV shows instead of shows on film like The Honeymooners or Lucy that people remember now. People kind of forget the live kinescope variety shows. You can find a lot of them on YouTube. But he was Mr. Television, lifetime contract with NBC, and a famous prick, like a famous bossy guy who wanted to tell everybody how to do everything. So when he comes on Saturday Night Live, apparently he was a prick. And he told everybody what to do, and he would argue about how he wanted things done. And he would also tell people what to do during his open monologue. By the way, when you watch the show, the sketches are crap, but Milton Berle's open monologue is actually really good, and he does a long opening monologue. But there are things that happen that seem impromptu that apparently he told people to do on purpose, which, by the way, I don't consider that a cop-out. Who cares? Like he had a thing, he said at a certain point, I want somebody to drop something backstage, and when you hear the bang, I'm going to go, oh, NBC lost another hit, and it got a big laugh.
Yeah.
Well, who cares if he set that up? That's still funny, But he was apparently a big prick and was banned from the show because and Lorne Michaels, I got that episode because I bought it off of YouTube, because you could buy individual episodes off of YouTube for like $2. But you'll never see a repeat, because they run the repeats sometimes at 10 o'clock on Saturday nights of the old episodes, and they'll run even the old ones like Richard Pryor's episode and stuff, but they never run Milty's because he hated Milty. Lorne hated Milton Berle for the way he acted. Another guy who got banned from the show was Sam Kinison. Sam Kinison, who
one of my favorites.
Sam Kinison, by the way, is sometimes on the show just as a stand-up act to do 5 minutes or something. But he did host the show, and it was because of his opening monologue, which was too racy, which nowadays, even if they played it, they would cut it off, by the way. They do that sometimes with certain opening monologues. They will go fade to black, and you'll see title cards going, what Sam Kinison said is not allowed on television, so we cut to black. This Martin Lawrence was banned from the show for the same exact reason, for doing an opening monologue about eating ass.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is a very funny skit that he later did in one of his comedy specials. But,
okay.
but
Bring it back.
because of that, he is banned from the show. And another person who, I don't know if they were banned from the show or not, but there was a lot of controversy. And I don't think there's as much controversy if you watch the episode now of the only time that Andrew Dice Clay hosted Saturday.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah.
Nora Dunn was a cast member. She refused to be on the show out of protest. But John Lovitz, in an interview, said later on, he said, that was the last show of the season and her contract was up. So she wasn't really doing anything courageous by not showing up for the very last show.
Yeah.
And they even do a joke like that. The whole show with Dice opens as a sort of parody of It's a Wonderful Life, where the devil, played by Lovitz, shows up to show him what life would be like if he didn't host Saturday Night Live. And then they go to the set and they show this speaker over this lady's legs and they go, "This is Nora Dunn. Because you didn't host, she showed up today and got crushed by this speaker." So there's actually very funny things in that episode. A lot of times the myth isn't as interesting or isn't as bad as the truth of it all.
Yeah. Dice, I remember being controversial, but it's like Gilbert Gottfried, and it's not exactly like that. But it's like how Gilbert Gottfried talks isn't how he really talks. How we think of his voice or whatever. That's an act. With Dice, it's like, man, that's the character that he's playing. Like, please don't confuse. This person isn't as like misogynistic or whatever as the act that he's putting on. That's what's funny about it. So to have him on, it's like, okay, is he going to drop the act? And then he kind of does here and there. And it's like, okay, like you said, for the critics and whatever that are just looking for anything to tear apart the show. That was one of those moments of like, oh, we really expected like him to show up and be all like warm and comfy and fuzzy. And it's like, man, that's not this show.
Well, you don't bring on that guy unless you want him to be that guy.
Yeah, are they going to bring Trump on and have this like, heart to heart with him? It's a comedy show.
You don't bring on Sinatra and ask him to sing Jefferson Airplane. It's stupid. You want Sinatra to be Sinatra. And by the way, I don't want to go on a tangent for Dice, but I've seen him live. Have you ever seen him live?
Okay. No, I haven't.
Hilarious.
Oh yeah.
Hilarious. I think gets a bum rap, and I think now his career is rejuvenated, and people kind of see him for what he is. I even liked his sitcom, his show on Showtime, Dice, where he's a guy he plays himself.
Right.
I actually was much more of a wordsmith than people give him credit for. It's really the choice of words that he uses. Like, he says outlandish, dirty jokes. Like he did this one joke where like he's slipping and sliding over jizz that's all over the floor. But it's because he says slipping and sliding that I laugh. He's like, and everybody's slipping and sliding. It's like, that's where it's funny. He talked about like accidentally an old lady was on the phone while he was masturbating and it became like phone sex. And the reason why it was funny is because his impression of reaching orgasm was, "Oh, you slob!" Slob is what's funny. It's the choice of the word slob.
Yeah, of all the things.
Yeah, you slob! Oh, you slob! Anyway, so those are certain guests or hosts that were particularly stand out. Do you have any that you'd like to add?
None that are bad. You hit Martin Lawrence and Dice for my two that are like, these were not good hosts, but like they're good. They're great, obviously. Otherwise, it's weird when those two things come together. Like as much as I love SNL. Anytime they have a host or just an episode where like everything seems off, nobody seems like, I get a little sad inside because it's like, oh, I know the show can reach great heights, but then you have somebody on that like is such a powerful personality or, just isn't into the whole thing. Like I think that was someone with Martin Lawrence, it's like his comedy's too edgy, or Kinison for that matter. Like they're so on the edge, they're actually past the edge of this edgy show, and the edgy show is all of a sudden trying to rein them in, and it's like, what are we? Somewhere along the way, it's like, what are we even doing here? Why have Kinison on?
Right.
If you're not gonna let him be Kinison. Why have Martin Lawrence on if you're not gonna let him talk about eating ass for some reason?
Well, you at least got to give the show credit for constantly inviting interesting people, one way or another, on the show, where no other place would have a conflagration of all these different people. And it's still around. Who knows what the future will bring from it? We have talked. This will probably be my longest episode talking about Saturday Night. But who knows what will happen next? Only time will tell. I think they should hire me, but other than that, I don't really have any feedback. But
my schedule is open, Lorne. I'm waiting by the phone.
Right? Yeah. I mean, come on. And by the way, Lorne is a funny name. Anyway, so all right.
Moon.
This has been.
And he really talks funny.
He talks very funny. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Great Goonan Podcast. I am the Great Goonan. I was talking with my pal Ross Allaire, and we were talking about Saturday Night Live. We will be live from New York one day. Who knows for how long, right?
Absolutely.
We'll see you next time. Peace.
Sick in the head.